Mark 12:38-40. Now, I don't know about you, but few things cause my blood to boil more than those who prey upon the elderly and steal their retirement savings. Imagine working hard all of your life, skimping and saving decade after decade for a retirement, only to fall for some scam in an instant and have it all taken away. Unfortunately, those who prey upon the vulnerable, those who take advantage of other people's misfortune, have existed all down through the ages, and Jesus' time was no different. In Mark 12:38-40, Jesus warned his listeners to beware. Beware of those back then who loved to parade around as though they were these great holy men of God, when in fact they preyed upon the vulnerable. Now, may I encourage you to watch this video all the way to the end, because when I apply this story to our modern times, the people who prey upon the most vulnerable, those who take advantage of other people's misfortunes, may not be the people who you're thinking of. Hi everyone, I'm Mark Leeming and welcome to my YouTube channel, where my mission is to provide you with sound theology in a brief amount of time. And so if you're looking for weekly videos with substance, please do consider subscribing, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Now, the 11th chapter of Mark's Gospel has Jesus arriving in Jerusalem on a donkey. And since the Jewish temple was located in Jerusalem, that meant that Jesus now came into constant conflict with the religious authorities, with the religious establishment, who then began to harshly attack him. For example, because he had none of their schooling credentials, he never went to any of their Ivy League schools. They, in fact, viewed him as a hick preacher from the countryside. They demanded to know what right, by what authority did he have to teach the common folk about God. They tried to trick him over the whole issue of paying taxes to Caesar. They questioned him on marriage and the resurrection and what was the greatest commandment of God. Which brings us to Mark 12:38-40, where right in the temple courts, and try to envision this, right in the temple courts, right in the belly of the beast, so to speak, with the religious authorities all around, all within earshot, Jesus begins to harshly attack them. He warned the common people to beware. Beware of those scribes, those so-called teachers of the law, who love to go around portraying themselves as these great and wonderful holy men of God, when in reality, they preyed upon the most vulnerable in Jewish society, the widows. Now, before looking at how all of that applies to us in the modern world, there's two crucial things that we need to look at first. Number one is that in the ancient world, you definitely did not want to be a widow. Lacking a husband meant lacking a reliable source of income, incurring all sorts of debt, making widows extremely vulnerable to exploitation in the ancient world. That's why in the Mosaic Law, the laws handed down by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, they were laws specifically made to protect the exploitation of the vulnerable and the widows. And that's why the Old Testament prophets and Jesus viewed true religious piety synonymous with social justice. But even the best laws are of no use if they're not followed, right? And here's the second crucial thing that we need to understand. The men who Jesus was talking about, the scribes, the teachers of the law, these were very learned, very educated men. They were experts at handling legal matters. They were the lawyers of their day. And in Israel, they were tasked as being the official interpreters of the Mosaic Law. So they were thoroughly trained in the Mosaic Law, and there was just no way that they could not have known about those specific laws protecting the vulnerable and the widows. And yet through sophistry and rhetoric, they were able to worm their way around all those laws and exploit the widows. Take what few possessions the widows had, take possession of the widows' homes, and simply toss them out on the street without thought. These men would then have the audacity, the sheer audacity, to parade around Israel in the marketplaces, in the synagogue, at banquets, portraying themselves as these great, virtuous, holy men of God. All right, so how do we apply this to our time? Well, up until just a few years ago, I would have immediately applied it to the church, because after all, there's lots of shysters in the church, isn't there? But the more I look around at our culture, the more I've realized that it's equally, if not more, applicable to those outside of the church. We live in these strange times where everyone, it seems, especially amongst the privileged classes, the Hollywood celebrities, the news pundits, the talk show hosts, the academics, the politicians, Everyone seems to be competing against each other as to who could be the most woke, who can be the greatest social activist, who can voice their support the loudest for the latest social justice cause or social policy meant allegedly to help the poor and the downtrodden. And it doesn't actually matter if that social policy or social activism actually helps the poor and the downtrodden. In fact, it doesn't even matter if it harms them, because that's not the point. The point of so much of this wokeness, this social justice movements, it has absolutely nothing to do with the poor and the downtrodden, but rather with the privileged classes, of how they can appear to be so woke and so virtuous amongst their peers, so that they can go to their cocktail parties and brag about how wonderful they are. They can go to their award ceremonies and give speeches about how they care for the poor. One of the clearest examples, for me at least, is what's taking place south of my border in the United States, where, especially amongst the privileged classes, the Hollywood celebrities, there's this demand to defund the police. And yet, when surveys have been taken amongst those who actually live in high crime-ridden areas, in the inner cities, they just don't want, the vast majority of them just don't want the police presence. They want more of a police presence, and that's because their streets are controlled by gangs, by pimps, by drug dealers. It's absolutely absurd to defund the police, and yet the results are predictable in these cities where politicians have defunded the police. Soaring crime rates and murder rates. And those who suffer the most are the poor and the downtrodden. And do you think any of that matters to the privileged classes, to the Hollywood celebrities, the politicians, the talk show hosts, the news pundits? Of course not. They live in their gated communities with their own private security forces, all the while patting themselves on the back about how they care for the poor. Okay, so perhaps I've said too much. Don't let this video get sucked down the YouTube memory hole. Please do share it with others, and I hope to see all of you next Thursday. Bye for now.